A quick note, this episode contains mention of self-harm. When Tracy's mom died, Tracy's daughter went in an unexpected direction.
She just didn't want to eat very much. And soon that turned into eating almost nothing. She would come home after school. She wouldn't eat a snack at dinner. She would push her food around her plate and she would just have a complete emotional meltdown and yelling and screaming and throwing things and just everything that was going on inside of her. She just didn't know what to do with it. And that's when she found self-harm.
Welcome to In This Family, presented by Nexus Family Healing. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray, President and CEO. When author and artist Tracey Yokas lost her mother, it was devastating, especially coming just a few months after her dad had passed. Her 8th grade daughter, Faith, was very close with her grandmother, but what happened next wasn't just tears and sadness. Faith quickly developed an eating disorder and was engaging in self-harm. Tracey and her husband had to navigate a series of counselors and treatment centers. There was success and a lot of setbacks, as well as a feeling of helplessness when they were unsure if Faith's life could be saved. But this was many years ago. Faith is grown now, healthy, doing great. And as Tracey reflected on that journey, she realized that a lot of Faith's problems echoed her own childhood. Patterns of behavior and ways of looking at the world that Tracey had been passing down. Tracey Yokas has a master's degree in counseling psychology and is the author of Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. Well, Tracey Yokas, it's so wonderful to have you on In This Family. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murray. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to talk a little bit about your daughter and your experiences with her mental health issues. I've heard you mention chronic trauma. Could you define for us what you mean by chronic trauma and then explain to us what you've learned about yourself experiencing that?
Yeah, I really appreciate starting with this question because I have to say it took so many years. I've been in and out of therapy since I was 30 and I'm going on 58. So it was just about a year before my book came out when I was working with my therapist, who was the one who really helped me identify chronic or complex PTSD as my diagnosis. I'd never received that before. And I don't know if I just needed 25 years to understand that is what was going on with me, or maybe it's partly that the society hasn't quite caught up with all the ways that trauma can manifest itself in childhood. But I finally understood what she was saying and could actually see what she meant in my reality, because I never defined myself as someone living with trauma. I had 2 parents and a roof over my head and enough food to eat, and I didn't live through a war, and I didn't suffer poverty. And it wasn't until then we started seeing the effects of everything that happened with my daughter that I then began to see myself in a new light. And I always like to stay starting this conversation. This is not about parent bashing. Our parents did, most of them, the best they could with what they knew. It has nothing to do with that. But it does have to do with understanding that they were raised in a certain way. They raised us in a certain way. They knew what they knew, and they didn't know what they didn't know. And my parents didn't know a lot of things. That's not a criticism. It's just a statement of fact. So you start learning this stuff before you can kind of parse it, like how you respond to and learn language, how you respond to things your parents are saying to you, how they deal with your emotions or don't deal with your emotions. Just all the things that go into parenting, of course, affect the adults that we become. And it wasn't until going through this journey and then beyond with our daughter that I began to see my responses or inability to respond, or my inability to deal with her emotions as a reflection of things that I had not learned how to deal with myself.
Oftentimes when we talk about acute trauma or chronic trauma, the difference is an acute can be something like a one-time event that's really affected somebody. Chronic takes place over a long period of time. Can you say specifically What have you learned was going on in your family growing up that was the quote unquote part of the trauma that was informing your own development?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important to say these things also get passed down. And I didn't know my grandparents, so I can't speak to that exactly. But I know that I understand now that my mother had very narcissistic tendencies around me, in addition to the fact that I was supposed to have a baby sister that was stillborn. So she had that going on in her history. And then my father was older than her. So he had, as a young child, survived the Great Depression. He had been in World War II. So he had those traumatic things. And then again, a child who died. And this is going back to like around 1970. And back then, I guess it was just the way people looked at this grief and mourning is like, well, it happened. There's really not a lot we can do with it. So you should just try to, like, get over it and move on. And of course, today we know how ineffectual that is. But back then we didn't. So, like I said, on my mom's side, there was sort of the narcissism and how that played out with how she was raising me around everything, including my body image and eating, and just never measuring up to some standard that I didn't even know what it was. And then on my dad's side was more sort of the codependency and always wanting to please and needing to take care of him, and just feeling like remembering, I learned at a very young age that their emotional health was my responsibility somehow. And that brings in the perfectionism and the need, your head gets kind of lopped off from your body. So your nervous system, I didn't understand any of this until a couple of years ago, but my nervous system learned that it always had to be hyper attuned to what was happening in my environment. And so it was always about taking care of somebody else before taking care of myself. And that's really foundationally then what carried through into the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's a great description. Thank you for describing that, because oftentimes people do think that one event has to happen to them to have trauma. And you are really nicely describing that intergenerational play where trauma affects everybody. And then they bring that into the relationships and into the family. And then those dynamics get played out. How did you learn about emotions, and how does that play into the dynamics between you and your parents?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to say, I don't think I learned very much about it. It was like, the only thing that was allowed was happy.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people can kind of relate to, if you got angry, it was, that's not allowed, or I'll give you something to really be upset about, or all of that stuff, which again, I can see now is probably how my parents were parented.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, human beings, especially children, have big emotions. And we rely on our parents to help us understand that and assimilate it and work through it rather than just shut it down. And so that is something, as we will get into, that I repeated with my daughter because I didn't know any different. It was like, being fine was kind of like what was allowed, and anything else was, like, get over yourself or whatever. And that's just not how human beings work.
Yeah, true. Is there any experience significantly, like one experience with your mom that really stands out for you that became a light bulb moment for you in your own healing?
Well, I just feel like, we also, adult survivors of this kind of childhood trauma, unfortunately, have a lot of gaps in their memory, which are things that were related to writing my own book. It was a real struggle because it's hard to write about things when you don't remember. So rather than like one watershed moment that I remember, what I remember predominantly is just feeling like I was the problem, which mostly manifested itself in my body. My body wasn't the right size. It was always too big. It didn't do the right things. It didn't look the way she wanted it to look. And there was just a constant stream of criticism related to that, which is compounded, of course, by our culture then and still today relative to female bodies and female identifying bodies. So I can't say again like that one specific memory, but there's just this overarching like day to day, like everyday interactions that had to do with this insufficiency, which came to define my whole life as just being I am insufficient somehow, particularly related to how I look and the size I am moving into my life. And so this was always something that I was trying to conquer in a variety of ways and failing, of course, to live up to this, whatever the imaginary standard was of perfection that I thought I was trying to achieve.
And I asked about your mom. Now, what about your dad? Any defining moment with him, or how does he fit into this?
Yes, well, gee, my dad was I still call myself, he's been gone for such a long time now, but I was still a daddy's girl, and he was such a special person to me. But truly, I think it was like I could never have put this to words, but I knew there were problems in my parents' marriage. And so again, this idea of I have to take care of him. If he's upset, it's my job to like make him laugh or make him happy. And then of course there was the food aspect. So where the criticism was always on one side, then it was like, let's go out, getting a treat that'll make us happy. Let's have ice cream because we love it. Let's go get, whatever. So food was always a way to ameliorate the discomfort that was sort of always there in the sub language. I didn't understand this until much later, but I chronically vomited as a child, and they took me to the emergency room any number of times, and there was never anything wrong. I didn't understand that until a couple years ago as a sign of anxiety. So there was just this low level discomfort that always existed that I came to understand it was my responsibility again to take care of, and wanting to do that, particularly for my dad, because he was the more emotional, I guess, of the two, I could say. And I just knew that I could do that for him. Like I knew that he loved me so much. I could make him laugh. I could make him happy. I could help his ease his sadness and all those things. Whereas my mom was much more shut off. And so like I guess I just understood I didn't have that ability with her. So I did it much more so with him.
Let's shift to your daughter, Faith. What were the mental health conditions that she and your family struggled with?
Yes, well, I'd like to point out, first of all, that I had her permission to write our book and my husband's as well, just because that always usually comes up. So she absolutely knows, and I have her blessing to discuss all these things. She is 27 now, so we're talking about things that happened over a decade ago. So we are all in my family passionate about sharing our story so that people going through now what we went through then know that they are not alone. So my mom passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly in the summer of 2012, and she and my daughter were very close. And maybe 2 weeks later, my daughter, this was the summer before her eighth grade year of school, woke up one day and she wasn't very hungry. And at first, that didn't seem like so bad because sometimes people aren't that hungry. And we had had, mimicking my childhood, weight and body image issues and all those conversations for years with her pediatrician, and middle school, which makes everything worse. So, that was all playing into it. But in short order, she basically stopped eating completely. And the less she ate, the worse her mental health became because, of course, our brains actually do need nutrition to function properly. So it wasn't long before she was diagnosed with severe depression, an eating disorder, which became NOS, and also self harm.
NOS, can you tell us what that stands for?
Sure, it stands for not otherwise specified. So sometimes if your child is struggling with symptoms that don't neatly fit into one criteria, they give NOS, not otherwise specified, as kind of a catch-all. And so it very rapidly escalated. We started with individual therapy and seeing a nutritionist, and within a couple of months, her therapist called us in to say it wasn't working. So we did POP, IOP. We did a couple of stints in residential treatment. There were calls to 911, emergency hospitalizations. So we ran sort of the whole gamut of interface with the system relative to trying to ameliorate the symptoms as they were playing themselves out. And she started to become suicidal with suicidal ideation. And so there was just a lot going on in a very short period of time.
You mentioned POP and IOP. Can you explain what those are?
Sure. POP is a partial outpatient, and then IOP is intensive outpatient. So when she first got into that, there's an eating disorder clinic near the house. So POP, partial, is she'd go to school during the day, and then she would go straight to the treatment center after school and do that 6 days a week. And then still yet she was not getting better. She was in fact continuing to get worse. So they told us to pull her out of school and put her in IOP, which is intensive outpatient. So she went to the eating disorder clinic all day and ate her meals there, but she still slept at home. So it wasn't until then, once again, they said that this isn't working and they were fearing for her safety that they said we really needed to consider residential treatment, which we did do.
So, Tracy, I'm understanding that your dad passed away, and then not many months after that, your mom passed away. This has had a great impact, my understanding is, on you and your daughter, Faith. Can you describe just how that was going for you and what was happening for you with just so much sadness and grief going on?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because I actually think grief and mourning is another form of trauma that has been extremely impactful in terms of generational inheritance in my family history. So that was just one more manifestation of it. And I will say that I didn't have time then to mourn my mother because my daughter got sick. And so I have no doubt, although I could not parse it out for you to be super concrete, but I was mourning the death of my mom and then my daughter got sick. And so my own mental health, which was tenuous related to all of these things and my self-worth and my identity and all of this stuff, which now I understand, talking about feeling like I had low self-esteem and all these things that were wrong with me. What I understand now much better is that actually those were symptoms of childhood trauma and like the way that my identity was formed. So I was having my own mental health struggles already, which is why I got into therapy when my daughter was born, because I knew there was something quote unquote wrong with me. So I was trying to figure out what that was, which I wouldn't figure it out for like decades. But that being said, I again did not have the tools to deal with what was going on, so I just tried to suppress it. And then my daughter got sick, and it was all eyes on that. So it wasn't until further in the process where, again, hitting my emotional rock bottom, of which my mother's death was a part of, my father's death was a part of, my child's illness was a part of, my marriage feeling like it was falling apart was a part of, not having healthy coping skills was a part of. So everything that had been what felt like individual strands or threads coalesced into this whole moment where my life like literally kind of ended up in pieces at my feet. So it was time, and I had mentioned I was seeing my therapist, of course, through all of this time. So there was a moment at which point it became okay, we've been talking about this for so long. What can you do to start taking care of yourself? Your daughter wants to see you taking care of yourself. Your husband wants to see you taking care of yourself. Your friends, if you're seeing them, want to see you taking care of yourself. What can you do? And then coming to a conclusion about one little thing that I could do to start taking care of myself. You have to take the first step. And, you know, and it grows from there.
I want to know how it was, how you and your husband's relationship was doing through all of this stress. How was that impacting just the couple relationship?
Yes, it was not good. I mean, I'll have to say, relative to repeating patterns, meaning how we learn how to parent, how we learn how to cope, neither one of us really had good skills related to that. He didn't learn them in his childhood, and I didn't learn them in mine. So we didn't do well with coping with our own emotional discomfort, let alone with each other's, let alone with our daughters. And so it was a very, very difficult time for us as a couple, for all the dyads and triads in the family in terms of, who we are and what we were experiencing. It did not go well for a long time. And we had to go, we were in family therapy, family group therapy, couples therapy. We were doing all the therapy. I was in my own individual therapy. And I will say one thing we kept hearing over and over and over again, which was so frustrating, was you guys have to get on the same page. And I totally understand that. But in the moment, nobody's on the same page. And so hearing things like that just ended up causing more grief than harm, because it was like, clearly we're not on the same page. We're not getting on the same page anytime soon. So we have to figure out something else.
What helped you and your husband the most to get through that stress, get through not being on the same page, and still stay intact in the marriage?
One thing we had to do, first of all, was stop focusing on each other's flaws, which, especially when it feels like everything is going wrong, is easier said than done. So that was something we had to undertake doing each in our own ways. And I will say that eventually the family therapy and family group therapy really began to help that, because it's like we saw we weren't the only people who were responding in this way. Like lots of the other couples were having just the same amount of trouble we were. So it was like, oh, okay, we're not like totally, out of whack here. And I guess we each had just a really serious dedication to making our marriage work, understanding and hoping, because I'm not sure we understood it back then, but at least believing that this was not the way things were going to be for forever.
That's great.
And that we had to keep working, even if we weren't doing it in the same way, we were working towards the same goals, which was our daughter's health and happiness, our own health and happiness, and keeping our family intact.
What did you have to give up to help the marriage through this stressful time? And what did your husband have to really learn and give up?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I've never been asked that exactly in this way. I feel like for me, again, I had to, well, I think this is probably true for both of us, actually, the more I'm thinking about it, is we had to give up our ideas. They may have manifested in different ways, but of control. I think we both wanted what we wanted from the other person, and we thought those were the things that we were entitled to, and that we were right for wanting them and for wanting things to go the way that we wanted, and all that wanting is involved there, especially relative to our daughter, wanting her to get better. And so it was quite a journey for both of us to understand that, of course, it's normal to want things and all that is entailed in that, but we actually don't have control over other people. That what we have control over ultimately is our own selves, and how we do our own healing work, and how we move forward inside of ourselves, which then is what manifests when we do our inside work, that manifests outward in our relationships with each other and with every human being that we meet. So I think, like I said, that looked different for each one of us, but ultimately that's something that we both had to give up, was this idea that the other one should be doing what we want in the way we want, when we want, because that's just what we want.
I really appreciate you talking about that. I think that's really insightful, really insightful. So now let's relate that idea of you both had to learn about control and giving up control. So how then does that now relate to the work that you were doing with your daughter and what you were going through there?
Yeah, I mean it's really identical in the sense of course, I must say these were not conscious thoughts at the time. Like we did not understand that this is what we were doing. So I just thought I was being a good mom, and I was, but I mean I thought it made sense that I just wanted my daughter to stop behaving in this way, because if she would just stop doing X, Y, or Z, then everything would be fine and life would get back to normal and we could go about our day and everything would be fine. And so it's a completely normal thought to have, that we want our ill children, especially, this is the rub, right, with mental health, because we still have so many struggles understanding it as an illness. So if we were talking about my child who had cancer, it would be so much easier for folks, I think, to understand, well, of course, you're not going to do that. But when it comes to mental health with this invisible illness, it's still, even knowing what I know, and having some little bit of background in mental health with my schooling and such, it's still so hard when you don't see something wrong to understand that things that are happening and being said and being done are not choices that a person is necessarily making. So I didn't look at myself as trying to control her behavior by standing outside the bathroom door, or by trudging back and forth in front of her bedroom door, or sleeping on the floor beside her bed, and all of these things. And when you have a suicidal child, these are things that happened for sure. But it's really kind of hard to wrap your brain in and around. But none of that was actually helping. All of that, like feeling like I could have some power over this, I should have some power over this, was just making the dynamic even worse than it already was, because she knew that we were upset. She knew what was going on. She didn't want to be causing us this pain. So it was a really complicated dynamic for me to understand, that I needed to stop and look at my own behavior. And some of that was told to us right away from the beginning. But like I said, these weren't conscious. Like, I wasn't sitting there going, oh yes, you're right, I'm consciously trying to, manipulate my daughter. But ultimately, that's really what control is about. And so it took me a while to really understand, oh yeah, I was being extremely manipulative, which is such a harsh word. And I don't think any of our therapists use that word with me, because it carries just so much judgment around it. It's a word I'm using, but that's what it was. And again, it took me a really long time to understand that, and even longer to be like, okay, ultimately what is happening here? Ultimately, what is happening here is I have so much discomfort inside my body, so much fear, so much anger, so much rage, so much every shame, so much negativity against my own self, and all the things that were going on that I had no wherewithal to deal with. And so that is what was coming out, was instead of having a way to deal with my own self, I'm trying to control the environment by making other people behave the way I think they should and do what I want and all the stuff to calm that down and I'm not saying I ever got to a point like if my daughter was really upset that I didn't have emotions. That is not what I'm saying. But we have to have tools. And I had no healthy tools back then to deal. But I mean, how I really dealt with things was eating and drinking. I gained 40 pounds and I drank a lot when she was in residential treatment because the pain was overwhelming and I didn't know what else to do. So I just completely numbed myself, which, enabled me to survive. But it really didn't help the situation. So it wasn't until, again, down the line where I really started to wake up to understanding all this stuff, where I was like, oh, okay. And having an individual therapist who never tired for 2 years of asking me what I could do to take care of myself every week, and hearing me list all the reasons why there was nothing I could do and all the things that were standing in my way, and looking at her like she was insane and showing up every week anyway, for me to finally go, oh, yeah, I am the only person I can control. What can I do? What is one thing I can do? And then taking the time to figure out what that might be.
What did you guys learn about how to help a child with an eating disorder?
So how I like to answer this question is always going back to my own self. And that the thing ultimately that helped the most, and my daughter would probably answer this in her own way, given an opportunity, but was, again, doing my own work and coming to the understanding that I just did not have the tools that I needed to cope, and that I had to start learning how to develop those so that I could be, for anyone who is into kind of the attachment language, like learn how to be a parent who could really enable secure attachment at the times when she was having her worst emotional meltdowns, which was being safe enough inside myself actually to do almost nothing, to be present in the face of that storm and not try to end it, not try to curtail it, not try to tell her anything about it being wrong to feel or right to feel that, about just anything. So I had to develop mantras that I just said to myself inside my head where I was sitting there. So I was present, but in my head, I was like, you're okay, meaning me. She's going to be okay. We're okay. There's nothing you need to do. I just kind of said things to myself over and over and over again so that my mouth would stay shut and my body would still be there, and like just not require anything from her to me, because it's not her job to take care of me emotionally. That is my job. And I think that for people who have had a childhood like mine or any sort of childhood trauma, that is such a hard thing to understand, because that wasn't our experience when we were kids. It was our job to take care of our parents emotionally. And so that's what we learned how to do. And we spent our whole life doing that. And then it went out to all the people in our lives, including our kids. And we have this sort of unconscious expectation then for them to do the same thing for us. And so it's actually not their job.
At what point did you see a turning point happening with your daughter's mental health issues from her starting this at age 13 and going forward?
Well, I'd like to start now in the present just to say that she's 27 years old now. And so there was an aspect of just needing to mature that I think was part of it. And she is living her best life. She lives on her own, well, with her boyfriend, and she loves her job. She loves her life. She has tools. She uses them, all the things. So I always like to say that and then go backwards. I really think that there was one big turning point in high school, which was actually her first boyfriend. He was just an extremely, extremely kind and sweet person. And she just up to that point had not ever believed that she was worthy of care and concern. You know, it's just not the same when it comes from parents, right? Especially for teenagers. I mean, he used to tell her all the time that she was beautiful. I think for her birthday, he bought her a mirror and he wrote in like paint pen, "You are beautiful" on it. I mean, and her friends, just her friends in school who told her how much they missed her while she was gone, and who welcomed her back when she missed most of eighth grade and then was able to go back to school for her freshman year. And then coming back around, like when she went to college, she was able to go to college, but there were late night phone calls and there were last minute trips to her school and things, really making ourselves completely available when we could. Again, that sort of secure attachment idea where when she needed the support, we were there. We didn't try to manage it, but when she called us, she knew we would be there, and we did it without fail. And then even up until after she graduated, there were a couple of stops before she landed where she was now. And again, so the idea of letting her have the space to mature and grow and learn her own lessons, because that's what we all want. We don't want people telling us what to do. We learn our lessons in our own way and time without judging her, or why aren't you doing it this way, or why aren't you going after that job, or why aren't you doing this, or why aren't you doing that I think so many parents get tripped up at, especially today.
Yeah, that's right. Well, she isn't here to speak for herself. So I wonder if maybe if you've ever asked her and if you could speak to what she has ever said, have you ever asked her her understanding of those struggles when she was going through them?
Yes, and so that did come up, when we were in family therapy, especially early on. I was trying to understand, like, for her benefit, less than ours. I mean, more than ours. It was for her own sake. And she did identify the death of my mother as something. And anecdotally, now that I've been talking about it and writing about it off and on for so long, I've seen this over and over again, especially with teenagers, that they have a sudden loss of someone very close to them, and that will trigger depression, other mental health issues. So she was able to identify the loss of my mother. And I mean, she could talk about the reason, self-harm was effective for her and how that, manifested itself and why she was relying on it. But I really think too, she understands that she just also needed time to grow and learn. Like, there were skills that we as her parents hadn't imparted in her early childhood because we didn't have them yet. And
Oh, like
so
what? Like, give us an
like
example. Yeah.
emotions, like dealing with her emotions. I mean, especially like anger is such a hot button, topic, because we parents can take anger so personally, like, don't be angry at me, or why are you, and all the things that were said to us. Like, we hear, even though we maybe tell ourselves we're not going to respond that way, if we haven't learned how not to, we hear ourselves saying the same things to our kids that our parents said to us. Because what else would we do if we haven't learned how to do something else? So for sure, having a healthy mechanism to really deal with big emotions when she was young were skills that we did not have. So as she entered treatment, and then we were learning then all of these things later, better late than never. But certainly I wish that we had known those things, when she was young.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to know what's the biggest piece of advice that you would give to families that are going through a serious mental health issue?
Well, the first piece of advice I would say is for sure to find a mental health specialist who deals with whatever the issue is. That doesn't mean the first person you find is going to be the right one, but I very strongly, if it is at all possible, urge people, there is no reason why you should know all this stuff. There are people who do this for a living for a reason, who have studied these things for a reason, and who can help you. You're not supposed to know how to handle all of this. So that's point number one. And point number two is get into your own therapy, again, if at all possible, because you need your own outlet for everything that's going on within you, but then also to be able to do your own work. Because like we said, whether it's directly related to behaviors that your child is exhibiting or things that they're saying, you maybe don't have the skills to handle it. There's probably, and it's nobody's fault, it's just the way the world works, there's probably other tools and things you have to learn about yourself, patterns that maybe are, not the best ones that you're repeating, thoughts, that aren't that helpful for you, which all of that is normal. But unless you have someone to help you, like, work through all of that, it's too much to deal with when you're also trying to help the person you love most in the whole entire world.
Is there anything else you would want us to know?
Well, I guess I just want everybody to know what I said earlier, which is to try not to give up hope, because this can be a very lengthy journey, but things can absolutely 100% get better.
Wow, Tracey, you have been incredible talking about these things. So helpful in everything that you've shared, and I appreciate you being on this show.
I thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to speak about these things, Dr. Murray. Thank you.
So, Tracey, where can folks find you?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have a website. It's TraceyYokasCreates.com. And all the information about me and the book and other things that I'm involved in is on there. And my book is Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing, and it's sold anywhere you'd like to buy your books.
In This Family is presented by Nexus Family Healing, a national nonprofit mental health organization. You can learn more about Nexus and how to support our mission at nexusfamilyhealing.org. The show is produced by John Moe with music from Jeremy Messersmith. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate, and write a review. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray. See you next time.